Welcome and thank you for joining us for the Emergency Management Software Design Principles and Concepts presented by Tony Danino. For over 13 years, Tony has been delivering simple and intuitive custom emergency management solutions, including advanced design, development, documentation, training, project management, and system administration, making EM users more productive. He has created superior, feature-rich systems for organizations such as the U.S. Senate, a national laboratory, counties, and other EM organizations. His design and development knowledge and experience are complemented with many years of technical consulting, IT, and project management experience. Tony can sit comfortably with stakeholders and non-tech users, listen to their needs, and then respond or explain solutions in non-technical terms. Or he can meet with technologists and discuss requirements in terms they understand. Please listen carefully and make sure you put any questions in the chat on Attendify. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Tony Danino. The virtual stage is all his.
Good afternoon, everyone. I have two bits of good news. First, this talk and examples could easily run 2 hours, but it's been condensed to just 30 minutes. Second, I'm not here to sell you anything. Today, I will be presenting ideas and concepts that can help you with your EOC issues related to incident management software. I won't be telling you how to run your EOC or what PC screens you should have or what you should display on the big screens in your EOC. Instead, I will be talking about concepts and features and ideas you might consider adding to your current EM apps or ones you are planning to create. The goal is to make your software more useful and therefore your users more productive. These design philosophies will include some examples. Most of the examples are based on software used by counties and some government agencies, but the concepts can be applied to any EM organization. I'm counting on you to imagine how a feature can work in your own EM environment. Before I begin, let's add some context with a very quick history of EOCs and EM software. This is all from my limited 13-year EM perspective. Every one of you has a good understanding of your current EM operation, but we need to step back for a moment and look at how we got here. In the beginning, EOCs used chalkboards and paper. That was eventually replaced by whiteboards and paper. Data on a whiteboard was current if someone in the EOC updated it with legible handwriting or printing. Everyone in the room could see the boards and knew what was going on. At the end of the activation, all written information was collected and maybe pictures were taken of the whiteboards. Everything was boxed up and stored somewhere. But there were two big problems with that method. First, anyone not in the EOC had to wait for phone calls or faxes or emails or text messages to get updates. Second, when it came time, maybe 2 years later, to get reimbursed from FEMA, it could be difficult to prove the timeline for certain activities. In the heat of battle, not everything was written down with the date and time. Plus, pieces of paper tend to get lost over time. So along comes your IT department with web-based software designed specifically for your EM operation, and both problems appear to be solved. Now, anyone with a valid user ID and a password and an internet connection can see and even participate in the activation as if he or she were in the EOC. The example I like to use is a battalion chief on vacation, sitting under a palm tree on a beach in Hawaii with a laptop. Plus, the software can automatically date and timestamp the data while the activation is happening. Afterwards, the information can be archived and, years later, retrieved intact and unaltered. Life in the EOC is wonderful. Plus, with a little work, we can take the format used on a whiteboard for, say, road closures and create a simple input screen and list screen. Done. What's next? A mass care screen, a damage assessment screen. They are all simple because they follow the same basic whiteboard to PC conversion procedure. As I said, life in the EOC is now wonderful, and whiteboards have been replaced with projectors and big screen TVs, and there's a laptop on every user's desk. But that euphoria doesn't last too long because just like pagers and simple cell phones, which were great a while back, we want an We want and expect more, hence smartphones and tablets. So what's wrong with our EOC software? We have a common operating picture, and we have a wide but controlled distribution of data using the internet. So why are we here? We are here because although our EOC software has some great advantages, it may also have some shortcomings that are holding us back. I will identify some of these, some of the ones I have encountered, and discuss how they can be overcome. Let's start with digitized whiteboards and forms versus smart screens. Your software at its most basic level probably started as what I call whiteboard replications or forms replications that never grew up. They were simply taken as is and digitized. That means there's probably zero information integration with other screens and apps. In other words, very limited, if any, software interoperability. Important sidebar. I am very passionate about information integration, and I'll talk more about that later. Meanwhile, we have users looking at and filling in forms that were migrated as is to PC screens, and those screens can be just as dumb as the paper forms. Wait, did I just call a paper form that is very well thought out, very well laid out, and very easy to navigate dumb? And why do I think all paper forms are dumb? Simple. Because a paper form does not know in advance how I plan to use it or what data I will provide. That means the form has to present every possible field, regardless of whether I need all those fields. And worse, I or the user has to look at every field and every section to determine if an entry applies or is required. Additionally, a paper form can tell the user a field is required, but it cannot make the user enter data. A paper form can tell the user two or more fields are related, but it can't make the user respond to them as a logical group instead of individually. By that I mean, suppose the form asks me to answer question 4 or question 5, but not both. Paper form cannot force me to answer one or stop me from answering both, even though the answers are obviously contradictory or mutually exclusive. A paper form can present the user with fields that have logical relationships, but cannot resolve logical or inconsistent entries. Let me give you a very, very basic example. One section of an input screen asks me if there was damage and has a yes checkbox and a no checkbox. And since we are very clever, we add an unknown checkbox and a not applicable checkbox. The field next to the yes checkbox says, if yes, enter a dollar amount. This seems so obvious and so straightforward, what could possibly go wrong? Well, what happens if the user clicks the unknown checkbox and enters 5,000 in the amount box? That doesn't make sense. So we guess the user really meant to check the yes box. But what if the user doesn't check any box and enters the word unknown in the amount field? What does that mean? There's been damage, but the amount is unknown? Or they don't know if there's been any damage? Wasn't this covered during training? Does any of this sound familiar? We can make this screen smarter than a paper form or a screen that is just digitized by initially showing only the 4 checkboxes and requiring the user to check one box and only one box. Then if the user checks the yes box, we display the amount field. If the user clicks another box, the amount field disappears. By the way, we can take this concept even further by not displaying the entire damage section on the screen if we can tell from other sections or fields that the damage section does not apply or is not a logical question or requirement for this entry. Okay, time for another sidebar. An alternative to fields appearing and disappearing, if not needed, is just graying them out, i.e. disabling them. Sometimes having a field disappear can be confusing to the user. Now you see it, now you don't. The cause and effect relationship may be lost during a real emergency. However, the relationship where a field is always there but disables and re-enables as quickly as a button or box is clicked can be more obvious to the user. I have a quick example of that. Okay, first note sections 6, 7, and 8. User has clicked not applicable in section 6 and none in section 7 and section 8. Okay, also, Note that the user has two options when leaving the screen. They can save and continue later, or save and submit. The second one will lock the record to prevent any changes. Okay, here's a close-up of those three sections. You see 6 is not applicable, 7 is none, and 8 is none also. Notice that all the fields are grayed out, so the user cannot click not applicable and then start entering data. We don't want that. That would be illogical. Okay. Here the user has unclicked not applicable for number 7 and and they've entered some data. You can see unclassified, and there's a time and there's a date. Now, if we look at number 7, they've unclicked none and they've clicked shelter. So now location and distance are enabled. If they had clicked evacuate, location or distance would have been enabled also. Go back and click none, and it becomes disabled. Looking at number 8, they unclicked none, but the two text fields below are still grayed out. Why? Because they haven't clicked any of the other. They haven't clicked shelter or evacuate or other. Okay, this is very important. The user cannot randomly or mistakenly enter text data without first selecting a checkbox. The checkboxes and the text fields work together. Okay, look at number 17, notification approved by EAM or ED, and then there's EAM or ED name. Now, we would expect that there would be a text field there so you can enter the name. However, before the user can enter that, a confirmation is needed that the person named has actually approved this document. It's another check. Okay, and here you see I've checked the yes box and the field for the name appears. Okay. Also, this is another situation where you have to use some common sense, not common sense, logic sense, I guess. If I click yes for media interest, then presence at scene should be enabled. If I click no or unknown, then we don't want the presence at scene checkbox or the yes box to be enabled. Otherwise, you end up with illogical stuff. Okay. Also, these exit buttons that you saw at the top a few slides ago, they are also at the bottom. It's just a simple way to make it convenient for the user. If the form is long, instead of having to scroll back up to exit or save, they can find it at the bottom. Okay. But why bother with this extra effort? Well, because unlike Word or Excel or Outlook, the user does not use this information on a daily basis. So the screen must be simple and intuitive. And by the way, that should be every web developer's mission, to make their software simple and intuitive for the user. Let me repeat that, simple and intuitive. Here's another example of a paper form that was elevated to a smart screen. All right, this is a paper form. This is a paper form checklist used by an operations manager. This one has 38 tasks. Note the header repeats itself at the top and at the bottom, and again at the bottom of the second page. Idaho National Laboratory uses 20 different checklists, but each manager sees and can access only the one that applies to them. The Emergency Action Manager checklist has 63 separate tasks. Yes, heavy is the head that wears the crown. Okay, next is a list display for that checklist. Each checklist has 5 sections. We can see the first one to be created, which is the second one on the list, was finalized and can only be viewed or printed. If we go to the far left, we can only view or print it. The one above it is still a work in progress, so it can be updated or printed. Note, completed sections show 100% completion and have a green background. Not only is this helpful for the ops manager, but his boss can quickly see what the status is at any time. So we told the ops manager the 4th section needs to be completed, but how do we present the data so that the ops manager doesn't need to scroll and scroll to find the incomplete tasks? Okay, instead of seeing seeing page after page of tasks, the manager sees a screen that matches the display screen. 5 sections, each colored to match the percent of completion from the list screen. Section 4 is yellow, so we know it needs work. We click anywhere on the label, on that yellow label, and Section 4 opens up. I can also leave it open and open other sections just by clicking on the label. 1, 2, 3. Okay, but why is Section 5 orange? Let's click on it. So I get a little message. This section cannot be accessed until the other sections are complete. Green, in other words. Okay, there is no way the user can get to it without completing the other 4 sections. The software is watching and knows. Why is that? Well, Section 5 is a final kind of approval screen. So we don't want that being data being entered until these other 4 are actually done. Okay, so we click OK, and we need to finish Section 4 before we can open Section 5. So if you look at 4.1.1, I have clicked on one of the checkboxes, and you can see the color of the Section 4 label has turned to green. Meanwhile, Section 5 is yellow. Okay. So I click on Section 5, and there's some fields there to be entered, which I did. And now Section 5 is green. You'll also notice at the bottom of the screen on the right, there's a Save and Lock button that wasn't there before. This appears only when the form is fully complete, and which means Section 5 has been completed. This button clicks, or it blinks slowly. It's there to get the user's attention, so they don't just click the Save button. Once this button is clicked, the list cannot be changed. So let's say we click on it. What happens? We get another message. Click the OK button to lock this checklist so that no further changes can be made. Click the Cancel button to not lock this checklist. Or click the Cancel button and then click the Save button. You can return later and make changes. Okay, this is really clear. And if that text isn't clear, well, we change it to make it simple for the user to understand that they're either going to lock this record and no changes will be made, or they can come back and work on it later. Okay. I want to show you another concept before we leave checklists. Okay, this is what will be printed. And, it doesn't look like the entry screen. It looks close to the entry screen, but this is what the printed output needs to look like. All right, this is what the input screen looks like. But what are those checkboxes on the far right? If I click on checkbox 1.1.1, a little comment window opens up. This allows me to enter a comment that only the user can see. It won't be printed or in the PDF file. It could be anything that is important to the manager that needs to be remembered or passed to another shift. Why require the manager to keep handwritten notes that will probably get lost? We can put them right here in the checklist. The text box will dynamically resize so it is only as big as necessary. Okay, if I click on the very top checkbox on the left side, on the right side that says check to show comments, I can see all the comments. But if a task does not have a comment like 1.1.5, no comment field appears. No comment field appears. Again, why show an empty text field and take up unnecessary space? Another reason for the extra effort is that during an activation, there is a lot going on. What can we do to make the user's job easier, faster, and require less thinking? My advice, guide the user. Avoid trying to control the user. However, while I can stop the user from entering alpha characters into a date field or skipping it entirely, I can't control what date is entered. Sometimes there are rules for filling out a form or a question comes up. That's where online instructions come in handy. we can put those little blue circled icons with the lowercase I next to fields. Everyone knows they mean supplemental information. Click on the information icon and a little information window opens up and tells the user something about the field. We've all seen them. They are great for communicating a simple explanation. Or you can have a separate page of instructions on the screen. Okay, in this example, we click in the upper right corner, there's a blue button that says show instructions. If we click on that, we get a whole page of instructions, and it could be scrolled if there's more. All right, another version of this is, again, show instructions. We click on in the upper right-hand corner. We click on that, and we get a small window of instructions. It's scrollable, but we still have the form in front of us, which is also scrollable. So we have two different windows that can be scrolled as needed. As you can see here, I've scrolled on that window, on the instructions window. Okay, yet there's still another version. If I click on instructions for this form, a scrollable window superimposes itself in the upper left corner. However, this window can be moved around. So I can move it to another section. I can do whatever I need with it on that window. Okay. All right. But there's an activation going on, and users don't have time to read instructions. And besides, who reads instructions? I believe the best way, where possible, is to guide the user into entering correct, consistent, and complete data. Don't try to control the user, just guide the user. Okay, what's the difference? Both methods will probably yield a correct input, but in my opinion, a user doesn't learn anything when they are controlled and cannot see other options. Guiding the user will get them to the right answer, but they will also have a better understanding of why it's correct and how they got there. Bottom line for smart screens, the smart screen watches what a user enters and dynamically responds. The screen shows or hides or disables fields as appropriate. Smart screens are a huge win for the user. They require less subject matter training and less thinking by the user. Plus, they eliminate confusion by preventing inconsistencies. Finally, smart screens are extremely important when the user who is entering the data is neither the source of the data, who understands the content, nor the person who will act on the data, who also understand the content. The user entering the data could be a volunteer who's just trying to do the best he or she can. By the way, instead of better training or different training, maybe what is needed is a better or different approach to an organization's software design. This allows us to catch and deal with user problems upstream. If we hear an expression like, oh, that will be covered in training, maybe we need to ask, how can we make a complex screen simple and intuitive and not pass the problem on to training? Just a thought. Now, some of you are sitting patiently on the edge of your seat, waiting for me to stop talking so you can jump up and say that the screen must match the form because you have a federally mandated requirement to print and submit the data on the screen in the government's approved format. Therefore, the screen must look just like the form. Well, that's not a problem for software because we can accept the data in one format and output it in another format. We can produce a hard copy that looks just like the original paper form. A simple example could be an input screen that has just two columns, one for input labels and one for input fields. But the printed output could be an elaborate form where the software fills in the blanks from that simple input screen. Okay, time for another example. All right. Notice here, notice number 7 and number 8 on the left side. They're consistent with the way we display the other fields. But on the printed form, which is on the right, you can see 7 and 8, and also 14 and 50 have been split. That's because this form needs to be submitted that way. But it was felt that we could make the screen more consistent and easier to follow. Plus, there's more room by using the format on the left side. Okay. The checklist we saw earlier is another example where the data could be acquired in a format that is more convenient for the user, but output to match a different format. That also means information like the date would be entered once on the screen at the beginning, but would appear at the top of each printed page. Okay, here you can see header information on the printed version, but it was only it's only once on the input screen. Okay. Bottom line, just because data goes in one way doesn't mean it can't come out a different way or several different ways. Okay, so why am I going on and on about making things simple and intuitive for the user? Because I feel very strongly that you should have a design philosophy that puts the user's long-term needs ahead of the developer's short-term convenience or limited capabilities. So why am I going on and on about making things simple and intuitive for the user? Because I feel very strongly that you should have a design philosophy that puts the user's long-term needs ahead of the developer's short-term convenience or limited capabilities. But wait, the developer's time is not cheap. So how do we justify the extra time spent on all these wonderful, amazing features? Well, when I was designing business systems in the private sector, there might be a feature that required an additional 25 hours of programming. But that feature would save 30 employees each 10 minutes a day. Assuming the developer earned 4 times the hourly salary of those employees, it would take the business only 4 weeks to break even. Trust me, I did the math. However, in an EOC in the public sector, things are different. We don't have 30 operators on the same app banging on keyboards all day long. But what if those 25 hours could reduce and improve software training for our EOC employees? And more importantly, keep them from making mistakes that communicate incorrect or incomplete or confusing data during an activation. And what if maybe during an activation that 25 hours saves 3 people in the EOC from having to work together for 20 minutes to figure out who entered the data incorrectly? Can we find that person and determine on our own what the correct data should be? How or why did the data problem happen? And how do we ensure that the problem doesn't happen again during this activation? Or let's involve 20 people in a hot wash or after action meeting to discuss this problem for 15 minutes. In this example, maybe only 60 minutes was wasted in total by those 3 EOC people. But is that what you want your EOC people doing during an activation? Chasing data entry problems for data that should have been entered correctly and completely? By the way, data integrity is crucial to maintaining the EM system's credibility. Lost confidence in software leads to wasted time because your EOC users are double checking or second guessing this on their screens. I'm not sure where the next example fits in, but it's about efficient use of space, and I believe you'll like it. There are 4 entries, and each has an update section on the far right in the blue box. But during a long activation, one update box can fill the entire screen. So, to avoid that, the update box can be expanded by just clicking anywhere on the blue box. And you'll see that in number 3. Clicking in the box will cause it, if I click on the box on screen, on the right-hand screen, it will contract. The alternative was adding a line that said read more or read less. In my opinion, that just occupies more space and you don't need it. This is quicker, simpler. Okay, here's another example. If you look at the first entry, and then I've clicked on it and it's expanded. Okay, but what's really important for this example is the far left column of different categories and the priority legend, which is across the top. We can call this a smart legend. Not only does it show priority colors, but it also, and what each one means, but it also shows the number of listed entries for that priority. defaults to showing all priorities. In this case, there's 6. So the user has clicked, if you look at the far left, user has clicked on current hazards, and that's the title, and it shows 6 entries. All right, if there were several screens worth of entries here, and I wanted to see just the urgent ones, I could click on that magenta button at the top there in the legend. Right now it says urgent with 1 in parentheses. I could click on that and just the urgent would appear. But let's look at the column on the left again. It lists the various categories, but it also tells me 2 things. First, what is the highest priority entry in that category? And second, how many entries are in that category? So if we look at the second one there, commercial facilities, there's a 1 in parentheses. That tells me there's only 1 entry for that category, and it is a low priority. It's yellow. So you look at your yellow and you see it's low priority. This could be huge because instead of spending time looking at each one, I can focus on the hotspots just by glancing at the colors and the numbers. Okay. Again, put the user's long-term needs, I'm going to repeat that, the user's long-term needs ahead of the developer's short-term convenience or capabilities. Okay, dashboards. These are great for integrating and summarizing data. You can have detailed data that it can be condensed by the app or in the background by the dashboard. Dashboards can be bidirectional. Normally, dashboards are not bidirectional. Normally, dashboards are not bidirectional. Data flows from a detailed app, an app with detailed information, to the dashboard. We'll talk about bidirectional. Okay, let me show you some examples. This screen has a lot going on. On the far left would be a list of all the organizations. This particular county, organizations or jurisdictions, this particular county has over 120. And so that list could be very long. It also shows to what level they're activated, or if they're activated. Then if you look at the body of the dashboard, you can see all kinds of different categories: hospitals, mass care sites, evacuations in schools, or whatever is important that they want to get a quick view of. By clicking on any of those categories, I can then go directly to the detail screen, and then I can return back to this screen. In the very bottom right-hand corner, you see SONGS, Summary Status Reports. SONGS used to stand for San Onofre Nuclear Generating Station, but it was shut down. And they had their own set of dashboards and summary reports. Telephone contacts. Which list are you using? You could have your own list there that you update specifically for an incident. Anyway, so there's a lot going on this screen, and but the important thing is it gives you summary information, but I can get to the details if I need to. Okay, this one here, this screen is about integration, and integration is, as I have said, one of my biggest passions. Individual apps are nice, but the goal should be to integrate them into a system. This provides meaningful information to a variety of diverse users instead of just silo data. It really raises an EM app to a new level. This screenshot represents a good example of what I mean. Okay, look at the far left. You see a column of jurisdictions. Okay, and then the blue headings are for individual apps, individual screens, animal shelters. I have a whole list of animal shelters, fires, hospitals. All those are typically individual screens, or if you want, an individual whiteboard. But supposing the mayor of Cathedral City calls me and says, "What's going on in my city?" Well, without a dashboard like this, I have to go to each one of those separate apps and see, is Cathedral City, is there an animal shelter open there or whatever, what's its status, all those things. So sometimes you have to slice across all those silos, and that's where a dashboard can be helpful. Another big thing here, notice the colors and the numbers. Where did your eyes go the moment you saw the screen? You picked up on the red. and you looked at Cathedral City, there's a lot going on there. But then you notice Palm Desert, the bottom one, has fewer red squares, but the numbers in there are greater. So I'm showing two things. I'm showing activity, what's going on there, but I'm also showing how many. For instance, in Palm Desert, how many animal shelters have been activated? 2 versus 1 in Blythe and Cathedral City. Okay. Oh, by the way, this board never got from development to production. There was a merger of 2 different agencies, and so there was some political turmoil, and the funding seemed to have gotten stopped. Normally, this would have a total line at the bottom, and as you scroll, the total line and the header line at the very top would always be there. It's kind of like an Excel spreadsheet feature you can do there. But the important thing is not to scroll and lose your totals or lose your header at the top, so you don't have to go back and try to remember what column you were looking at. Okay. Okay. So a short list of amazing things you can do with your EM software. Dynamically resize text boxes. We saw that the box expands or contracts based on the amount of text you enter. Accountability and auditability. You can insert information about the user, how to get a hold of that user if necessary. You can do things like who created this entry, who was the last person that touched it, or if you really need details, you can be saving who touched it in between the first and the last and what did they do. That gets really detailed, but it can be done. Okay, history. You can show changing or evolving information, or you can freeze and save a point in time, a snapshot. Why is that important? Because as things are changing, a decision could be made based on a sit rep, and 10 minutes later, something's changed. Okay, 3 days later, 3 weeks later, someone will say, why did you make that decision? Didn't you know this other information? Well, no, at the time we didn't. Here is a snapshot of what was happening at that moment. This is how we based our information. Okay, ability to carry forward data from a previous record as a starting point or starting with default data. This seems so obvious and so simple, but oftentimes when there's a shift change, data has to be re-entered from the previous shift. Someone's got to print something out and then re-enter. That's silly. There's a chance they'll re-enter it incorrectly. That's not necessary. Why not start in default data? Why not start off the form with default data? And if you're concerned that they're going to rubber stamp it, there are ways to make sure that the user actually did touch the data. Okay. And that last point is very important. Okay, wait a second. So, in conclusion, a good EM system does not require rocket science. However, it does require adhering to best practices. Try to give a consistent look and feel to all your apps so that the user feels like they're in a system, not a bunch of separate, different apps. Okay, employ innovative problem solving. Software is flexible. If something isn't working, come up with another solution. Okay, reject quick and simple software tricks that ultimately limit or distort your growth. Your software should evolve. It shouldn't mutate. You shouldn't have one app that is so different that it's unrecognizable from the other ones. That's what I call a mutation. Lastly, adopting a design philosophy that puts the user's long-term needs ahead of the developer's short-term capabilities. And finally, focusing on using the power of the computer to make the user's interaction with your EM software simpler and more accurate. Now, and the last point is very important. There's a lot of horsepower with our systems these days, with our software, behind the development software. Use it and take advantage of it. Okay, now some of you will say, Tony, we are already doing all of that. My response is do more. Meet with your users, especially new users who might bring new ideas or different experiences. Ask your users what changes could make the software better, that is easier to use. For example, make training sessions bi-directional. Encourage users to offer ideas. If the wording that management or developer has chosen isn't clear or isn't the standard wording of the people being trained, change it. Ask them what would be more clear, more simple. And finally, don't make users think their software is cast in concrete. There is a reason why we call it software. Okay, that concludes this session. Thank you for attending.
Thank you for that presentation, Tony. We did get a question in our chat box. It says, the use of smart screens sounds like a step away from filling the EOC with subject matter experts. Is it your intent to make it easier on the user regardless of user's background, or make it easier for response to have someone fill a seat to help the EOC become operational? I'll let you unmute and answer that question for me.
Thank you for that prompt. That's an interesting question. First of all, subject matter experts, SMEs, may not always be available. Then what do you do? But let's assume they are all available. But how thinly can you stretch them? That's another question if you have a large EOC. I think the goal is to take people who know what they're doing, who are experienced with the content, the whatever it is they're supposed to be working on, and make their lives easier and their input more accurate. I really don't think you can take people who are inexperienced, put them in front of a screen and say, here, start doing something. I think that's pushing it too far. Even smart screens aren't going to do that. I would stick with making your current users, knowledgeable users, more productive. Does that answer the question?
Thank you, Tony. And people can follow up with you. You'll be able to find all the presenters' emails in the Attendify. So there is another question. We have just a couple of more minutes that I'd like to ask you, Tony. It is, any idea on how to automate a group that refuses to let go of their paper forms? They must be talking about us older generation, although I'm doing much better. Go ahead.
Not necessarily, but one way is to propose a pilot study, one of those, what have you got to lose? Give us a chance to show you what we can do. And I would choose a paper form that is difficult. If you choose an easy one and is successful, people will say, so what? But there's things you can do with a digital form that you can't do with a paper form, unless you have that SME standing behind the user, answering questions, pointing things out. So pick something difficult and then build on your success. But always remember, if you're not taking work off their plate, if you're not making their lives easier, the user, it's not going to go. It's, again, so what? And also metrics. Metrics are very important. There should be goals, like measurable goals, like how fast can something be delivered? Can a notification be sent? How many errors, by what percentage will we reduce errors? Keep in mind when you go to ask for money to increase in budget to get this done, saying that 100% of the users thought it was great and they want to keep using it, that may not fly. But if you can say we reduced errors by 75%, we cut the distribution time of this information by half, metrics do get attention. And they're quantifiable. So that's what I would do there.
Thank you for that. Again, I want to remind everyone to make sure you fill out the survey form so that you do get credit for your attendance. Tony, thank you so much for that presentation. How enjoyable that was and interesting. It will conclude our session, but I want to remind everyone that we do have many more sessions in the next 2 days that I hope you can join. And tonight at 4 o'clock Mountain Daylight Time, everything's about us in Albuquerque, so it's Mountain Daylight Time. We are having our social hour, and I hear some people might dress up their animals rather than themselves, and that's fine too. Again, Tony, thank you so much for your presentation.